Evelyn Cross had never been afraid of hospitals. For most of her life, they were just places where things got fixed: broken bones, high fevers, a slipped disc here and there. Even when Mark had first gone in with that persistent cough, she didn't think much of it. He was tough. He was careful. 67 and still splitting firewood behind the house for no reason except he liked the smell of it. But on the night of January 3rd, everything changed. She sat beside his hospital bed in the dim glow of the monitor light, her fingers wrapped around his. The skin was paper dry. His knuckles, once strong and tan from a life of labor, were pale and thin as porcelain. A nasal cannula hissed lightly, pushing air into lungs that were fighting harder than he was. Outside, snow fell with a kind of cruel silence. The storm had rolled in heavy that evening, dumping wet flakes onto the city and freezing the streets solid. She remembered thinking maybe if the ambulance had come sooner. But even that thought was flimsy. The infection had moved fast, faster than anyone expected. By the time he'd been admitted, his chest X-ray looked like someone had poured fog into his lungs. Mark hadn't spoken in hours. The morphine dulled everything: his pain, his breathing, and eventually his voice. But Evelyn stayed, even when the nurse suggested she get some rest. Rest? She'd repeated, her voice hoarse. You don't rest when the person you've loved for 40 years is trying not to die. She regretted the snap. The nurse had only nodded and quietly refilled the 4-bag. Now, her hand trembled slightly as she reached up and brushed a strand of thinning hair from Mark's forehead. His once vivid green eyes fluttered open for a second. He saw her, really saw her, and tried to smile. It barely moved the corners of his mouth. She leaned in close. It's okay, sweetheart. You can sleep. He blinked slow. Once. Twice. Then something in his face changed. Evelyn recognized it instantly. She'd seen it once before, years ago, when her mother passed in a recliner chair across from the television. That subtle release, the long, final exhale that sounds almost like relief. Mark's chest rose once more, then stopped halfway. The monitor beeped twice, stuttered, and drew out a long, flat line. She didn't cry. Not at first. The nurse entered the room moments later, already knowing. They had seen this before. Dozens of times. But Evelyn hadn't. Not like this. Not Mark. Not her Mark. They offered condolences. Brought her water. Called a chaplain. She didn't respond. She just sat in the chair with both hands in her lap, like a woman politely waiting for a bus that would never come. The funeral was scheduled within 48 hours. She declined the expensive casket, the polished headstone, the glossy funeral home programs with fancy fonts. Mark would have hated it. She chose a plain wood coffin and asked the pastor from their old church to speak. Mark had stopped attending years ago, but still believed in God, in his own quiet way. When the service ended, people told her she was strong, that she carried herself with grace, that Mark was smiling down from heaven. She nodded, said thank you, shook hands, pretended to believe them. But inside, something had cracked. Mark had been the anchor. Not in a domineering way, he wasn't that kind of man. But he was steady. Predictable. A man who read the newspaper cover to cover. Who filled the gas tank when it was half empty. Who bought her sunflowers every first Friday of the month, because roses were too cliché. Now, he was gone. And in his place was silence. A fridge humming too loud. A kitchen table with only one placemat. A house with a closet full of clothes that still smelled like wood smoke and Old Spice. The following week was all paperwork and numbers. She sat down with a man from the bank who kept using phrases like, liquidate assets, and fixed income bracket, while she stared at the folders like they were written in a different language. There were medical bills insurance didn't cover. The life insurance payout was modest, eaten up by the burial and outstanding debts. Social Security told her she was eligible for a survivor's benefit. It barely paid enough to cover rent and groceries. She had never been rich. But she and Mark had made it work. Stretching coupons. Stocking up on non-perishables when they were on sale. But for the first time, Evelyn realized how tight things really were without a second check coming in. And it terrified her. She didn't tell anyone. There wasn't really anyone to tell. No kids. A sister who lived 2 states away but had her own problems. A few neighbors who meant well but wouldn't understand. So she did what women like her had always done. She kept going. She put on her boots, even when the soles cracked. She drank instant coffee and cut her pills in half to make the prescription last longer. She stopped turning on the heat unless it dropped below freezing. And every Monday morning she took her small list, clipped her coupons, and walked to the supermarket. The one with Register 5. Where everything was about to change again. The envelope arrived 3 weeks after the funeral. It was pale blue with a window in the center, and the unmistakable bold lettering of a government office. Evelyn didn't open it right away. She let it sit on the kitchen table next to the old napkin holder and the empty salt shaker. The kitchen was still set for 2. 2 chairs, 2 placemats, 2 chipped coffee mugs. Every morning since Mark's death, she sat in her usual seat and left his untouched. It felt wrong not to. Like she'd be admitting he really wasn't coming back. That afternoon, she finally tore open the envelope. The letter was clinical, polite, and unfeeling. A few lines thanking her for her application. Another confirming her widow's benefits had been approved. Then the number, $1,143. Monthly. Her hands stilled. The mortgage alone was $850. Add electricity, water, prescriptions, food, and there was barely enough left for a tank of gas. And then what? No room for repairs. No room for error. And certainly no room for the quiet dignity she had always carried like armor. Evelyn folded the letter neatly and set it aside. She wouldn't panic. That wasn't her way. Instead, she pulled out the yellow notepad from the drawer, the one Mark always called her ward board. Every bill had its own line. Every dollar had a job. She sat for hours, drawing lines between needs and wants, making impossible math behave with pure willpower. She canceled the newspaper. She cut the cable. She downgraded her phone plan and began boiling water on the stove to heat the bathroom when the space heater broke. And still, the numbers bled red. The problem wasn't extravagance. It was survival. She wasn't buying steaks or fancy soaps or wine. She was buying instant oatmeal. Generic ibuprofen. A jar of peanut butter that would last 2 weeks if she was careful. But the world wasn't built for careful. It was built for constant consumption. Prices inching up, wages frozen. And no one giving you a discount because your husband died with a mortgage still to his name. Evelyn knew pride wouldn't pay the bills. But it was the one thing she had left. And she wouldn't let it go without a fight. The next Monday, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror and inspected herself. The cardigan was old, but presentable. The coat had frayed at the cuffs. Her boots had a strip of duct tape across the left toe where the sole was peeling away. She considered putting on makeup but didn't. Who would she be trying to impress? The cashier? The pension office? The ghost of her former life? Instead, she tucked her list into her coat pocket, folded her coupons into a neat stack, and locked the door behind her. It had snowed again the night before. The sidewalks were a mosaic of ice patches and salted gravel. She moved slowly, one gloved hand grazing fences and parked cars for balance. The walk to the supermarket took 11 minutes. She knew because she timed it, long enough to brace herself for the fluorescent lighting, short enough to count as exercise. Inside, the heat and sound hit her like a wall. Radio static filtered through the speaker system. "Don't Stop Believin'" was playing, mockingly upbeat. She grabbed a hand basket instead of a cart. A cart implied abundance. A basket kept her honest. Cans of tomato soup, 2 for $3. She grabbed one. Store-brand bread, $1.29. Into the basket. Peanut butter, dry beans, a small box of pasta. A single apple. She passed the meat section without glancing. The prices were obscene. Mark had loved pork chops on Fridays. She hadn't eaten meat in over a month. At the end of aisle 7, she stopped in front of the toothpaste. Crest was on sale, $2.89 with coupon. She had $3 left in her budget. She stood there for a full minute before turning away. Toothpaste could wait. The line at the checkout snaked halfway down the cereal aisle. People looked distracted, annoyed, scrolling on phones, breathing heavily into scarves. Evelyn didn't mind. She used the time to go over the math in her head again. It came to $11.89 before tax. She had $12.02 in her purse, mostly in coins. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward and handed over her basket. The cashier was a young man, maybe 18, 19. Blonde, shaggy hair, clean uniform, tired eyes. He didn't smile. But he didn't look bored either. He scanned quickly, efficiently, occasionally glancing at her as if trying to place where he'd seen her before. The screen lit up, $12.06. Evelyn froze. She dug into her purse again. Counted the coins. Twice. Still short. 4 cents. She looked at the toothpaste again. No. That wasn't it. She hadn't grabbed it. Then she saw it. He'd rung up 2 apples. Only one had made it into the bag. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Excuse me, I think there's a mistake. Before she could finish, he waved a hand and punched a few keys. The total dropped to $12 exactly. She blinked. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the card reader. But she didn't move. Something about it gnawed at her. Was it kindness? Pity? Efficiency? Evelyn paid the $12. The bag felt heavier than usual, even though it barely filled half her arm. As she walked out into the cold again, something in her chest tightened. She hadn't lost just Mark. She hadn't just lost stability. Somewhere in this mess of forms and coins and split-second discounts, she'd lost a piece of herself too. Not all at once. Not loudly. But quietly. The way snow melts. The way dignity bleeds. She looked back through the glass doors at the young cashier who had just typed in a silent discount to spare her embarrassment. She didn't want his pity. She wanted her life back. 3 days after the supermarket incident, Evelyn sat on her front porch in the late afternoon, sipping hot water steeped with the last of her peppermint tea. Her coat was buttoned to the top, her breath visible in short clouds. Across the street, the Lawson twins were pelting each other with snowballs in their front yard, yelling and laughing like school was out forever. The world, as always, kept moving. It offended her. Not in some dramatic, self-pitying way, just in that quiet, simmering way that comes when the outside noise no longer matches your internal rhythm. She had lost Mark. She was counting nickels. And yet here came the mailman with flyers, the garbage trucks rumbling by, the neighbors making jokes about the weather like life hadn't shattered just 6 weeks earlier. People had stopped offering casseroles by now. Grief had a half-life. At first, they'd come with well-meaning sympathy, full-wrap lasagna, supermarket pies, little notes written in blue ink. Thinking of you? Call if you need anything. They meant well, but no one really expected her to call. And she never did. Now, when people saw her walking to the mailbox or scraping her windshield, they offered soft smiles and eyes that darted away too quickly. There was no ill intent. Just distance. Like her widowhood was a shadow they were afraid might fall on them if they stood too close. She turned back inside and shut the door with more force than necessary. Inside the house, it was too quiet. The furnace ticked in the corner, but the heat barely reached the far rooms. She wandered into the kitchen and opened the fridge, even though she already knew what was in it: a few slices of bread, half a jar of peanut butter, a small carton of eggs, and some leftover beans she'd be eating for dinner. She hadn't been truly hungry in a long time, but she wasn't full either. There was a tightness in her stomach that food didn't fix. She wasn't sure if it was sadness or shame. There were things she didn't tell anyone. She didn't tell them how she'd stopped turning on the bedroom light because it made the empty side of the bed too visible. She didn't tell them how the automatic payment for the Netflix account bounced last week and she just let it go. She didn't tell them that yesterday she used shampoo as dish soap and wiped her counters down with vinegar and water. These weren't tragedies. They weren't even worthy of complaint. But they were daily reminders that the margin for error had vanished from her life. She wasn't living anymore. She was maintaining, threading a needle between disaster and survival. Day after quiet day. The phone rang. It startled her. No one called anymore unless it was a scam or a robocall. She picked up anyway, because there was always a sliver of hope it was someone real. "Mrs. Cross?" came a woman's voice. "This is Denise with Evergreen Dental. Just calling to remind you that you're due for a cleaning." Evelyn paused. She hadn't been to the dentist since before Mark passed. The insurance had lapsed. The bill for the last visit had quietly gone unpaid. "I won't be coming in," she said. There was a brief silence. "Oh, okay. Would you like to reschedule for?" "No," she said a little too firmly. "Just cancel it." She hung up. The house echoed in the silence afterward. She stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, trying to remember when she had started lying to herself. When she had started pretending that she was managing fine. That it would all even out eventually. It wouldn't. The numbers didn't lie. And neither did the ache in her knees when she walked the aisles for too long, or the way her hands shook when she counted coins too slowly at the register. There was no cavalry coming. No surprise inheritance. No miracle savings bond. Just her. And the long, cold days ahead. She wandered into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Mark's side was undisturbed. She had tried sleeping there once, early on, thinking it might help. It didn't. It felt like wearing someone else's shoes. She opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was Mark's old watch, the one he wore for 30 years, even after the band broke and he had to tape it shut. She wound it slowly, listened to it tick. It didn't make her feel better. But it made her feel something. Evelyn wasn't sentimental by nature. She didn't hoard old letters or cry during commercials. But lately, she found herself holding on to objects with a strange intensity. A cracked mug? His old flannel shirt. The harmonica he never learned to play. She used to tease him about it, how it sat in the drawer for decades untouched. Now she picked it up, held it to her lips, and blew a single shaky note. It was terrible. But it made her laugh. And the sound of her own laughter, foreign and raspy, echoed through the quiet house like a knock on a locked door. For a second she let herself imagine that things could shift again. Not back to what they were. That was gone. But maybe forward. Somewhere. Somewhere that didn't taste like shame every time she paid for groceries. Somewhere that didn't feel like the world had left her behind. But she would need help. And Evelyn Cross didn't ask for help. Not yet. But she was beginning to understand, if she didn't, this world. This fast-spinning, uncaring machine would chew her up and never stop to notice. And dignity, once gone, didn't come back on its own. Tyler didn't hate his job, he hated what it said about him. He had promised himself he'd be gone by Christmas. The plan was simple: take the cashier gig at Pine Hill Market, earn enough to pay back his parents for the semester he flunked out of. Save a little, reapply to school in the fall. 4 months, max. It was now late January. He was still there. The problem wasn't just money. It was momentum. Once you stop moving forward, it's hard to remember how. You start taking longer lunch breaks. Clocking out a few minutes early. Hanging around the break room hoping someone says something interesting just to break the monotony. Tyler was 19, smart enough to fake confidence, too insecure to show how scared he really was. He told his friends he was taking a gap year, told his mom he was exploring options, told himself he was fine. But every morning he pulled on the stiff green apron and clipped on his cracked name tag. He felt like he was slipping deeper into a life he never meant to build. The job itself was easy. Scan, bag, smile, repeat. He could do it half awake, and often did. But the hours dragged. And the people blurred together. Young moms juggling toddlers. Retired men who bought lottery tickets and frozen dinners. Teenagers stealing candy bars when they thought no one was looking. Then there were the regulars. People you started to recognize by their habits. The woman who always bought unsalted butter. The man who refused to let anyone bag his groceries. And Evelyn Cross. He noticed her early on because she was quiet, efficient, and never made small talk. She came in Mondays around 10 a.m. Always alone. Always with a list. Her basket never held more than 6 or 7 items. Sometimes she paid in cash, but mostly in coins, rolled nickels, stacked quarters, dimes that had clearly passed through many hands. There was something unshakable about her. Something that made Tyler nervous, not because she was rude, but because she looked through him. Like she had seen too much to be impressed by a kid in an apron pretending to be helpful. Still, he tried. One week he offered to bag her items. She shook her head. Another. He told her the soup she liked would be on sale next week. She nodded, said nothing. She wasn't cold. Just distant. Like a radio tuned slightly off station. Present, but unreachable. He didn't know her name at first. Then one day, while scanning her items, he caught sight of the pharmacy bag in her basket. E. Cross, the label read. After that, he started noticing things. How her hands trembled slightly when she counted coins. How she flinched at loudspeaker announcements. How she always glanced behind her in line. As if ashamed to be holding people up, even when she wasn't. She reminded him of his grandmother, before the dementia fully set in. That same rigid self-reliance. That same iron will barely concealing how fragile everything had become. One Thursday evening, during the lull between the post-work rush and closing, Tyler found himself restocking gum at the front when his manager, Reggie, came over with a clipboard and an exhausted sigh. Need you to cover Saturday. Morning shift. I've worked 6 days straight. Reggie gave a shrug that meant, so what? We're short. You want hours or not? Tyler nodded without arguing. What was the point? The overtime might help him save faster. Might let him leave sooner. Might get him unstuck. But it didn't feel like momentum. It felt like cement. That night, Tyler sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the college rejection letter pinned to his wall, not because he liked looking at it, but because it reminded him why he couldn't stay where he was. He'd bombed 2 finals. Missed too many classes. Stopped asking for help because he didn't know what kind of help he needed. Now he was here. Punching buttons. Ringing up eggs in silence. The next Monday, Evelyn came through his line again. Tyler greeted her like he always did. She offered a short nod. As he scanned her groceries, 1 apple, a can of beans, a bag of rice, toothpaste, he felt it again. The nagging sense that something was off. Her shoulders were hunched a little more. Her breathing seemed tighter. She was $1.88 short, and didn't ask to put anything back. She just stood there. That was the moment he decided. He typed in a manual discount, rounding the total down. He figured she might thank him. Maybe smile. She didn't. She stared at him and asked, "Do you think I'm a charity case?" Tyler froze. The line behind her went still. Her voice was loud, not angry, just sharp. Cracked. The kind of voice that had been holding back for months. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to apologize. To explain. But all he could think was that she'd seen right through him. That she didn't want his help, she wanted her dignity. And he had just stepped on it. The register beeped again. Someone behind her coughed. But Tyler couldn't move. Because for the first time since he started the job, he realized the work wasn't about groceries. It was about people. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most dangerous thing you could offer someone was kindness they hadn't asked for. The first time Tyler really saw Evelyn, not just as a customer, but as someone real, wasn't the day of the confrontation. It was 3 months before that. She had come in late. It was a Tuesday. Around 7:30 p.m., just before closing. The store lights had dimmed slightly, a passive-aggressive signal for lingering shoppers to wrap it up. Most of the aisles were empty. Except for an old man reading labels like they were novels and a couple in workout gear buying energy drinks and bananas. Tyler was on register too, yawning between customers and mentally replaying a text argument he'd had with his ex. His shift was dragging, and he was half ready to clock out when she appeared. She walked in with a limp. Not a dramatic one, barely noticeable, but her gait was uneven. Left foot dragging just a fraction longer than the right. Her coat was zipped up to her throat, her scarf tucked in tightly. She moved with the kind of precision that came from necessity, not choice. Every step had a purpose. Every motion had an edge of calculation, like she was measuring effort against cost. She went straight for the essentials. Bread. Eggs. A small bottle of milk. A can of soup. As she passed Tyler's register on her way to the checkout, he noticed something unusual. She had no phone. No earbuds. No distractions. She wasn't multitasking, or scrolling through recipes on Pinterest. She was present, focused, like someone running a mission instead of an errand. He didn't think much of it until she came to his line and unloaded the basket with careful deliberation, organizing the items by weight. He greeted her automatically. "Evening." She gave a quiet nod. Didn't speak. He scanned in silence. When he announced the total, $11.73, she reached into her coat and pulled out a little fabric coin purse. Old and faded. Patterned with sunflowers that had long since lost their color. She emptied it directly onto the counter. Quarters, dimes, nickels. Even a few worn pennies scattered across the surface like raindrops on cement. Tyler paused. Customers usually handed him the coins. She didn't. She stood still, watching. He hesitated. Then began counting. $3.75. $5.10. $6.25. When he hit $10, she raised a hand. "Just the bread, the soup, and the eggs," she said. Her voice was low and even. The kind of voice that didn't ask for sympathy because it knew none was coming. He nodded and took the milk off the total. That left her with 17 cents to spare. She took them back and returned them to the purse without a word. Tyler bagged her items in one of the store's cheap brown plastic bags. She took it gently, like it might break. As she turned to leave, she stopped for a half second, then looked him in the eyes. "Thank you," she said. Not out of politeness, but with weight. Like it cost her something to say it. And then she left. That night Tyler sat in his car long after his shift ended, thinking about her. He didn't know her name. Didn't know her story. But he recognized something in her, some invisible pressure that narrowed your world down to what you could afford to carry. She reminded him of how it felt to walk across campus pretending not to hear your phone buzzing with overdue balance warnings. She reminded him of the sound his mom made when she thought no one was home, and she was crying over a surprise medical bill. The next week, she came in again. Same day. Same time. Different sweater. He tried to be more helpful. Bagged her items with care. Gave her a heads up about a buy one get one on the beans she liked. She nodded once and said nothing else. But the week after that. She skipped. And the week after that too. Then one Monday morning, there she was again, this time earlier, back on her usual schedule. He was on register 5 now, the main checkout line. And she stepped into it quietly like she'd never missed a beat. That's when he learned her name, E. Cross, printed on the pharmacy bag. And from that day on, he started keeping track. Not in a creepy way. He just paid attention. How she always brought her own list on a small piece of folded notebook paper. How she never touched the in-store flyers. How she sometimes stood in front of the produce section for 5 full minutes before walking away without choosing anything. Each Monday, she came in. Same time. Same pace. Same coin purse. And each Monday, Tyler felt the same gnawing frustration. He wanted to say something. Ask if she was okay. Tell her he noticed. Noticed how hard she was working just to survive in a world that didn't care. But what could he say? Hi, I see you're barely holding it together, want to talk about it. No. That wasn't how people like Evelyn operated. You didn't break through people like that with small talk. You earned their trust with silence, with patience. With not intruding. Still. When she showed up short that day, $1.88 off, he didn't think. He acted. Rounded down the total without permission, without asking, because to him, it felt like the smallest decent thing a human could do. But to her? To her, it felt like a violation. It started with the power bill. Evelyn had always been frugal. She knew how to layer sweaters, how to close off and use rooms in winter, how to light a candle and sit with a book instead of flipping on the TV. But January had come in mean, nights dropping into single digits. A wind that scraped the windows like it wanted in. When she opened the envelope and saw the number, $143.87, her chest tightened. That was nearly double what she'd budgeted. She didn't panic right away. She went into problem-solving mode, the way she always had. The way Mark used to, before his mind slowed and she had to do the math for both of them. She pulled out her yellow notepad, the war board, and started moving numbers around like puzzle pieces. She could skip laundry this week. Use the bath towels twice. She could eat what was left in the pantry, even if it didn't go together. She could cut the heating schedule, turn it off during the day and wrap herself in blankets, maybe boil water at night and sleep with a thermos. It wasn't ideal, but she'd done worse. The real hit came on Thursday. She slipped on black ice outside her building. Not a dramatic fall. Just one of those awkward slips that jar your whole body even if you don't go down. She caught herself on the railing but felt something pull deep in her shoulder, a sharp pain that made her drop the grocery bag she just picked up from the food pantry. It tore open on the stairs, scattering cans and dry pasta across the cement. She stood there for a long moment, one hand gripping the railing, the other hanging limp at her side, her breath visible in sharp, angry bursts. She didn't cry. Not then. Just slowly crouched, wincing, and picked up what she could salvage. Later that night, her shoulder throbbed so badly she could barely lift a cup. She debated calling urgent care but didn't. She couldn't afford the copay, and what would they do? Give her a sling? Tell her to rest? Rest from what? She hadn't worked in months. Her days were built around rationing, time, food, heat, strength. There were no sick days in poverty. You just adapted. By Friday, she was dizzy from skipping meals. She told herself it was nothing, just fatigue, just stress. But she knew her body. Knew what hunger felt like when it crawled under your skin and made a home. She found an old tin of chicken bouillon cubes in the back of the pantry and boiled one into broth. It wasn't food, not really, but it filled the space. That night, she went to bed with her coat on. She dreamed of Mark. Not the strong, steady Mark who fixed the porch roof every spring and left coffee mugs half full around the house. This Mark was thinner, pale, lying in his hospital bed, mouth slightly open, eyes already starting to glass. In the dream, he tried to say something. She woke up before he could. By Sunday, she had nothing left in the fridge but a wrinkled apple and half a stick of butter. She counted her money, every coin, every crumpled dollar, and wrote her list. Beans. Bread. Soup. Toothpaste. She stared at that last item for a long time. The tube had been squeezed to its limits. She'd even cut the end open and scraped it out with a cotton swab, something she'd sworn she'd never do. But teeth mattered. They always had. Mark used to say, "You can lose your keys, your money, your mind, but not your teeth. Those go, everything else follows." So she circled it on the list. As if circling it would make it fit into her budget. The walk to the store was longer than usual. Not literally, but it felt heavier. Her shoulder still ached. Her body weak from light meals and cold nights. But she bundled herself tight, braced against the wind, and told herself just get through the checkout. That was all. Just make it past Register 5. The store was busier than usual. She hadn't accounted for the weekend crowds spilling into Monday morning. People moved fast, carts rattling, small children crying over cereal boxes. Evelyn kept her head down and filled her basket, carefully. She knew the numbers in her head. She had done the math. If she skipped the soup, she could maybe get everything else. As she stood in line, she gripped the handle of the basket like a lifeline. There were 3 people ahead of her. A mother with a fussy toddler. A man buying protein powder. A teenager with a frozen pizza and a 2-liter of soda. Each beep of the scanner made her pulse quicken. When it was finally her turn, she handed over her items and waited without meeting the cashier's eyes. But she knew his voice. "Morning," Tyler said. She gave a short nod. He scanned the items, one by one, and bagged them without a word. Then the screen blinked, $48.17. Her stomach dropped. She opened the coin purse with a practiced hand and started counting. Her fingers trembled. $46.29. She knew the moment he saw it. The flicker in his face. The pause. The silent decision. Then he tapped a few keys. The number changed. $46. A kindness. A mercy. And she hated it. Because that's when it hit her. This wasn't just one bad week. This was her life now. Scraping by. Being rescued. Losing piece by piece what she had spent a lifetime trying to preserve. And in front of all these people, in the middle of canned goods and gum displays and loyalty card pitches, she felt her dignity start to slip. "Do you think I'm a charity case? Do you think I'm a charity case?" The words hit the air like a slap. Sharp. Unapologetic. The man in line behind her stopped unloading his cart. A woman browsing tabloids 2 aisles over turned her head. Even the toddler in the cart next to the gum rack went quiet, thumb hovering just short of its mouth. Tyler froze. His hand was still on the register, but he wasn't typing anymore. His mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he had expected from her, this wasn't it. Evelyn's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence that followed gave it weight. It was the kind of stillness you only hear after something real is said, the kind of moment where time seems to hesitate, waiting to see what happens next. She stood tall. Shoulders back, spine straight. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't causing a scene. She was standing in a pool of quiet rage, and that was louder than any outburst could have been. Tyler took a breath. "I didn't mean. You didn't ask," she cut in. Her voice didn't shake. He didn't know where to look. At her eyes, which were sharp and direct? At the display screen, where he'd changed the price by $1.88. Or at the people gathering behind her, phones in hand, waiting for something to happen they could talk about later? "I was just trying to help," he said softly. Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what everyone says. Until the help turns into pity." Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. Not out of weakness, out of restraint. She looked around, scanning the dozen or so strangers now eavesdropping on her moment of humiliation. "You think I don't know how this looks?" she said louder now. A woman standing at the register, short on change. Can't even afford toothpaste. You think I don't see the looks, the sighs, the fake sympathy? No one spoke. A cart rolled slowly to a stop against the edge of the next register. I wasn't always like this, she continued. I wasn't always reduced like this. Her voice cracked, not in volume, but in depth. And with that, the wall broke. Just a little. My husband worked for 41 years. Paid taxes. Paid into Social Security. Didn't owe a damn thing to anybody. We saved. We were careful. I clipped coupons. Cooked from scratch. Lived within our means. She looked directly at Tyler now. He didn't flinch. He looked heartbroken. And then one winter he gets sick. Hospitalized. 5 days. Dead by the 6th. Evelyn swallowed hard. Her throat was dry. But she refused to pause. They sent me a bill so high I thought it was a misprint. $18,700. For what? For watching him fade in a room with bad lighting and a machine that beeped every time he slipped closer to the edge. The crowd around her had grown, but no one dared say a word. Phones slowly lowered. No one wanted to record this anymore. It didn't feel like entertainment, it felt like truth. I went from a wife to a widow in a week. From living to surviving in 2. And now I'm here, in this store, being rescued by someone who doesn't even know my name, because I'm short by $1.88. She finally let go of the counter. I'm not mad at you, she said. More quietly now. I know you meant well. But what you did wasn't kindness. It was a spotlight. And sometimes, when all you have left is dignity, a spotlight is the cruelest thing in the world. Tyler looked down. He felt like the floor had opened under him. He started. I just didn't want you to have to put anything back. Evelyn held his gaze. I was ready to. I've done it before. It's not new to me. But what you did, it made me feel like I was less. Like I couldn't be trusted to choose my own sacrifices. The store was dead quiet now. No music. No announcements. Even the beeping from the other registers had stopped, as if the entire building had pressed pause. And then, after a long moment, Evelyn sighed. I'm tired, she said. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the air. Tired of pretending I'm okay. Tired of making hard choices and being treated like I'm a lesson in someone else's day. She reached into the bag, pulled out the toothpaste, and set it gently on the counter. Take that off, she said. I'll make it work without. Tyler looked up. And then something happened. A teenage girl in line behind her stepped forward and held out a $20 bill. Don't, she said. You don't have to do this alone. Evelyn turned startled. Another voice. Put me in too. An older woman stepped up and placed a $10 on the counter. Then a man in a construction jacket. I've been there, he said. Lost my wife in 2020. This is nothing. In under a minute. The counter was covered in bills and coins. Not just enough to cover her groceries, but enough to pay for the next trip, and maybe the one after that. Evelyn stood still, her fingers brushing the edge of the register. She didn't cry. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. Evelyn didn't move at first. She stood there, her palm flat on the register's edge, staring at the folded bills and loose change piled where her dignity had almost been stripped. Something inside her had expected rejection. A scoff. Maybe a few polite apologies and people shuffling uncomfortably. But not this. Not a teenager giving up $20 without hesitation. Not a woman with grocery bags already full offering a 10 with the quiet confidence of someone who understood. Not a man in worn work boots laying down a 5 and muttering, "Been there." The line behind her had changed. It wasn't just people waiting anymore. It was witnesses. Contributors. Co-conspirators in a small, quiet rebellion against the idea that surviving alone was noble. Tyler stepped back slightly, his eyes wide, blinking more than necessary. He glanced at the total, then at the crowd, then at Evelyn, unsure of what to do next. The manager, Kelly, approached from aisle 4. She had seen the crowd from her perch near customer service and came over bracing for a customer dispute, maybe a shoplifting situation. Or worse, a viral video in the making. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice tight. Tyler opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn turned toward her first. "Nothing wrong," she said calmly. "Just a bit of truth." Kelly scanned the scene. She looked at the money on the counter, then the crowd. No yelling. No arguing. Just people. Watching. Offering. Choosing not to look away. Tyler cleared his throat. "I rounded down her total," he said. "She was short by less than $2. Kelly's jaw tightened slightly. She was a stickler for policy. Not because she liked rules, but because she knew how fast things could spiral when you didn't stick to them. "Technically," she began. "Technically," said Evelyn, "I could have gone home with half a bag of groceries and more shame than I walked in with." That shut Kelly up. The line was still at a standstill, but no one complained. No impatient huffs. No angry glances at watches. No one switching lanes. It was like everyone had agreed, silently, that something important was happening, and it deserved time. A young mother in a hoodie, holding her toddler on one hip, stepped forward and whispered something to Evelyn. Something only she could hear. Evelyn nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then another customer, an older man with a cart full of canned goods, reached forward and tapped the register. "Why don't you use what's left for the next person who's short?" he said. "Pay it forward. Or whatever." Tyler glanced at Kelly. She gave a stiff nod, then backed off. Not exactly approval. But not a denial either. In retail, that was as good as permission. Evelyn didn't know what to say. For months, years really, she had tried to stay small. Invisible. Dignified in her struggle. And in one raw moment, she had been seen more clearly than she ever wanted. "I didn't ask for this," she murmured, unsure if she was talking to Tyler or the crowd or herself. But the teenager, the girl who had offered the 20, shook her head. "You didn't have to." And that was the thing. Wasn't it? Kindness wasn't about asking. It was about noticing. About showing up without needing to be invited. Evelyn gathered her bag slowly. This time, she didn't rush to get out of the way. She didn't shrink. She let the moment hang in the air, let it belong to her. The teenager helped her secure the strap. The man in the work boots tipped an imaginary hat. A few others gave her nods of acknowledgement, nothing dramatic, just small signals that said "we saw you." As she walked away, she heard someone in line whisper, "We should do that more often." Another voice added, "That's what community used to mean, right?" Tyler stood frozen behind the register long after Evelyn was gone. The pile of extra bills and coins sat untouched, just to the side of the receipt printer. He felt like he should do something ceremonial, wrap it in a velvet cloth, write a plaque, something. But instead, he just opened the small donation tin usually reserved for kids' sports fundraisers and gently placed the bills inside. He wrote a note on a sticky pad and stuck it to the front. "For anyone short." No judgment. No questions. It wasn't corporate policy. It wasn't approved. But it felt like something real. And right now, real was rare. Kelly didn't say anything when she walked by an hour later and saw the note. She just glanced at it, read it twice, and kept walking. That afternoon, Evelyn sat at home with her coat still on. The bag of groceries on the floor beside her chair. She hadn't put anything away yet. She hadn't moved much at all. The house felt different. Still quiet. Still cold. But something about the silence had changed. It no longer pressed against her. It just waited. She stared at the wall for a long time. Then, slowly, she stood up, unzipped her coat, and finally put the toothpaste away. Evelyn didn't plan to speak. Not like that. Not to strangers. Not in a supermarket. Not when her pride was already sitting in pieces on the checkout counter. But something cracked open after the toothpaste hit the belt. After the teenager's kindness, after the fifth person put $1 down without blinking. After her own voice, sharpened by hunger and humiliation, rang out louder than she ever intended. Once the words started coming, she couldn't stop. She stood just past the end of the conveyor belt. Groceries bagged and paid for, but her body wouldn't move. It was like the part of her that had been holding everything in, every worry, every fear, every skipped meal and late-night cry, decided. No more. You know what it's like, she said, looking not at Tyler but at the floor. It's like you're drowning in slow motion. Not in water but in things. Bills. Memories. Paperwork. Grief. A few people in line looked at each other. You keep telling yourself it'll get easier. That you'll adjust. That this is just a season. But it doesn't pass. It becomes normal. Like standing in line counting coins is just what life is now. She turned toward the line, not with anger but clarity. People think when your husband dies, you fall apart right away. But you don't. You pay the bills. You answer the calls. You pick a coffin and figure out how to make the pastor say what you need him to. You don't fall apart, you get efficient. The air was thick. Tyler didn't breathe. And then, Evelyn said, her voice cracking for the first time, then the food runs low. The check doesn't stretch. And you realize you've gone from being a person who had a life, to a person who's surviving a shadow of one. A man in line lowered his eyes. A woman stepped forward and rested a hand on the counter, not on Evelyn, just near it. Like a gesture of anchoring. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. I didn't ask for pity. I don't want it now. But I'm tired of pretending I'm fine. I'm not. I'm proud. I've worked. I paid my taxes. I raised nieces when their mom couldn't. I volunteered at food banks. And now I'm one bad week away from needing one myself. No one interrupted. Even Kelly, the manager, didn't move. She stood near the end of the candy rack with her arms crossed, not defensive. Not irritated. Just still. Listening. Tyler finally found his voice. You shouldn't have to explain any of this, he said quietly. Evelyn met his eyes. I know, she said. But I do. She wiped her hands on her coat, not because they were dirty, but because she needed something to do. And I know I'm not the only one. That's when it shifted. Not before. Not during the exchange of money. Not during the confrontation. Now. That sentence cracked the silence in a different way. Because now, it wasn't just Evelyn's story. A man in his 40s behind her spoke next. I lost my job last May. Been doing delivery runs since. Grocery store's the only place I go where no one asks if I've found something full-time yet. The woman with the toddler nodded. I cut my insulin in half last month just to keep my kid in daycare. You think I told anyone that? You think I wanted to? Someone else. My mom gets by on one social security check. We take turns pretending we're not hungry so the other one can eat. A murmur moved through the line. Not outrage. Not discomfort. Recognition. And Evelyn stood in the center of it, no longer a spectacle, but a catalyst. She stepped aside so Tyler could start ringing up the next person, but no one moved immediately. They weren't done being in this moment together. Something unspoken had been pulled into the light, and no one was in a hurry to shove it back in the dark. Tyler gestured gently. Go ahead, he said to the man next in line. The man hesitated, then nodded and started unloading his cart, but slower, more deliberately. As if performing the small act of buying food now carried new meaning. Evelyn took her bag, which suddenly felt lighter than before. Or maybe she was just standing taller. On her way out, a young woman from aisle 3 caught up with her and pressed something into her palm. A small card, handwritten. It read, "You reminded me we're not alone." "Thank you." Evelyn didn't say anything. She just nodded and kept walking. When she stepped into the cold outside, her lungs burned from the sudden rush of winter air. But it wasn't unpleasant. It was clean. Sharp. Real. She had been holding her breath for months. Now she finally let it out. The register light kept blinking for a full minute after Evelyn left. Tyler stood behind it, hands resting on the counter, watching the doors where she just disappeared into the cold. He didn't move. Neither did anyone else for a few long seconds. Then, slowly, life resumed. The scanner beeped. Bags rustled. The next customer stepped up and handed Tyler a loaf of bread and a tired smile. No one said much, but they all felt it. Something had shifted. And none of them could go back to the moment before it did. At the end of the shift, Tyler stayed late. He stared at the donation jar he'd relabeled with a sticky note. For anyone short, no questions asked. He counted the bills and coins. Some were folded tight, like people were embarrassed to give. Others were loose, as if they'd been waiting for a reason. There was $87.42. In a store that moved thousands of dollars an hour, it wasn't much. But for someone like Evelyn, it was everything. When Kelly passed by on her way to the office, she slowed and glanced at the jar. "You clear that with corporate?" she asked. Tyler didn't flinch. "No." She looked at him, expression unreadable. Then she said, "Keep it where I can see it." That was as close to a blessing as he was going to get. The next day, the jar stayed. So did the sticky note. Word spread quietly at first. Customers who'd witnessed the moment told friends. Others just started dropping change in without saying anything. Some even slipped in anonymous notes. "For the woman with the scarf who reminded me not to judge. This is for my mom, who never let us know when we were poor. Paying forward what I once needed and couldn't ask for." Tyler started noticing new things. More customers using coupons. More careful eyes scanning price tags. More hesitations at the register, followed by a glance at the jar. And more hands gently reaching for the gap between what they had and what they owed. The jar covered 8 short orders that week. No fuss. No humiliation. Just quiet gaps filled by invisible hands. Corporate didn't say anything, because Tyler didn't tell them. Because no one complained. Because in a place known for prices and points, something human had taken root. And Evelyn? She didn't come back the next Monday. Or the one after that. Tyler watched the clock those mornings like he was waiting for a storm. When she didn't appear by 10:20, he felt it like a missing tooth. Something off in the rhythm of the store. But on the 3rd Monday she returned. Same coat. Same coin purse. Same careful pace. Except this time, she walked a little taller. She got in Tyler's line even though Register 3 was open. She placed her items on the belt without comment. Beans. Bread. Soup. And this time, she added a second apple. Tyler greeted her like he always did. "Morning." She nodded. Then handed over a folded envelope. He blinked, confused. "What's this? Something I should have said earlier?" She paid in full, down to the penny. Then took her bag and left without another word. When Tyler opened the envelope during break, it wasn't cash. It was a letter. "You didn't save me. That's not what this is about. You saw me. And you let others see me too. That takes more courage than I had. Thank you, for your mistake. And for what you did with it. Evelyn." Tyler reread it 3 times. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't frame it. But he kept it in his wallet, right behind his expired student ID, like a reminder of what real education looked like. The store changed after that. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But it softened. Cashiers began watching more closely, discreetly helping where they could. Regulars started leaving little extras: diapers, cans of soup, toothpaste. A kind of quiet revolution took place. Not with fanfare, but with eye contact and unspoken understanding. Evelyn became a legend. Not because she wanted to, but because she stood still in the place most people run from, and spoke. Spoke in a voice tired of pretending. Spoke in a way that gave others permission to stop pretending too. She didn't become a viral clip or a local news story. She became something more dangerous. Relatable. And for everyone in that store, everyone who had ever stared at the register screen with their heart in their throat, she became proof. Proof that it wasn't weakness to be honest. That it wasn't failure to fall short. That the people behind you in line might be strangers, but they were your strangers. And sometimes that was enough. 2 weeks after Evelyn's return, the store ran out of sticky notes. Tyler had been replacing the one on the donation jar every few days. It kept peeling off under the weight of humidity, curious fingers, and time. Each new note said the same thing. For anyone short, no questions asked. But the latest one stuck longer than the rest. Someone, he never found out who, rewrote it in black ink and taped it down with clear laminate. No more curling corners. No more peeling. It was permanent now. Official in a way that didn't need permission. The donation jar became part of the store. Quiet, unobtrusive, but always there. A soft light in a hard place. People still dropped change in it. Of course, but now they dropped more. A woman left $20 after using only 2. A man in a suit once asked to speak to the manager, then handed over $100 bill and said, "This stays between us." Tyler heard stories that never made it to the receipts. Like the mother who used the jar to buy diapers when WIC fell short. Or the teenager who paid for cereal with quarters and walked out with her head held high. Or the elderly man who brought a can of beans every Friday and left it anonymously near the display with a sticky note. For someone who needs a little extra. The ripple moved outward. Kelly, the store manager, noticed it first in the staff. Cashiers who used to power through their shifts like machines began asking quieter questions. "You doing okay today? Need help finding anything? Want me to price check that again?" These weren't upsells. These were people learning to see people. Some customers cried at the register. Some just smiled like they hadn't in weeks. One man, after his card declined, whispered, "This place is different," and left with all his groceries intact. No one called corporate. No one bragged. They just did it. Because they could. And Tyler? He changed, too. Before Evelyn, he had been adrift, bitter about flunking out, angry at himself, at his parents, at the world. He didn't know who he was or what he was for. But that day at the register, that moment when he tried to quietly shave $1.88 off a total and got a revolution instead, rearranged him. He started showing up early. Staying late. Helping bag for other registers. He asked the manager if he could take over the community board in the break room, which had once held faded flyers and expired coupons. He replaced them with handwritten notes. "Seen someone struggle today? Tell us how you helped. Need help with groceries this week? Talk to Tyler. No judgment." Some notes were anonymous. Some had names. Some were just doodles. But the board filled. Tyler began keeping a journal, something he hadn't done since middle school. It wasn't about the store. It was about people. Fragments of stories he overheard, quiet conversations at checkout, names of regulars and their patterns. It was messy and personal and absolutely not for school. But it made him feel more alive than any class ever had. One day, about a month after Evelyn's moment, he sent an email to the local community college advisor. Subject line: Application to social work program. He didn't tell anyone at first. Not because he was unsure. But because it felt sacred. Private. Like his future was no longer an obligation. It was a choice. Meanwhile, Evelyn's story continued to echo. Though she didn't speak up again, others began to. A middle-aged woman offered to start a quiet shelf of donated basics, milk, bread, canned soup, where anyone could discreetly pick something up if they needed it. The store said yes. A part-time employee named Jordan created a small sign near the customer service desk. Struggling? You're not alone. Ask us how we can help. It was subtle, and not everyone noticed. But for those who did, it meant everything. Some nights, Evelyn sat by her window and watched the snow fall. The pain of Mark's absence hadn't dulled, but it had shifted. It wasn't just weight now, it was shape. A shape she could live beside, even if she could never fill it in. She still counted coins. Still measured out meals. Still made tough choices. But now, when she walked into the store, she didn't walk in invisible. Tyler always smiled. Always rang her up personally if he saw her. And sometimes, on rare days when her budget allowed, Evelyn would buy a second can of soup. She'd slide it onto the quiet shelf when no one was looking. It wasn't about charity. It was about contribution. She wasn't the spark anymore. She was part of the fire. And that fire kept spreading. The sticky note was still there 6 months later. Faded now. A little curled at the edges, even with the lamination. But it stayed. For anyone short, no questions asked. By then, it wasn't just a jar. It had become a small, unspoken contract between strangers. A promise that no one would leave humiliated for lacking $1. A quiet declaration that the store, at least this one, had room for people's dignity. Register 5 had a reputation now. Not because it was the fastest. It wasn't. Tyler was thorough, sometimes slow. He looked customers in the eye, asked how their day really was. Sometimes paused to listen instead of rushing them forward. People started requesting his line. Sometimes they waited longer just to talk to him. Not because he fixed anything. Not because he could lower totals. But because in his presence, they felt seen. He didn't talk about Evelyn unless someone asked. But he kept her letter in his wallet like a compass. Folded carefully next to his class schedule. He was back in school now, 2 nights a week, working toward a degree in social work. It was hard, and it was slow, but it was forward. And he knew exactly why he was there. Because once, someone had refused to be silent in front of him. And that moment had done more than shift his perspective. It had handed him one. He kept a copy of the store's employee handbook in his locker. On the inside cover, he taped a photo someone had snapped weeks after Evelyn's confrontation. It showed the donation jar, half full. Sitting next to a small handwritten note. To the cashier who believed people still care, thank you. He didn't know who left it. He didn't need to. Evelyn still came every Monday. Same time. Same aisle. But now she walked a little differently. Not fast. Not flashy. But without flinching. She didn't shrink from the crowds. She didn't stare at the floor. She didn't apologize when she needed a minute to count. She carried herself like someone who had earned her space. Because she had. She didn't speak about what happened that day. She didn't need to. The store remembered. The regulars remembered. And every now and then, a stranger would look at her with something like recognition, not because they knew her name, but because they had heard the story. The story of the woman who spoke her truth in front of cereal boxes and soda specials. The story of a kid who made a mistake, and then made it matter. The story of a moment when people put down their groceries, their phones, their walls, and just listened. She never asked to be remembered. But she was. One Monday in late spring, she arrived to find something new taped to the front of Register 5. A small brass plaque. Nothing fancy. Just a rectangle, screwed into the checkout counter just above the card reader. It read, Register 5. In honor of every person doing their best. We see you. We stand with you. She stared at it for a long time. Tyler didn't say anything. He just rang up her usuals: beans, bread, toothpaste, 2 apples, and bagged them gently. When she reached into her purse to pay, he stopped her. Covered, he said. You've earned a free round. She frowned slightly. Tyler, don't worry, he said with a small grin. It's not charity. He pointed to the jar, which now had a new sign beneath the old sticky note. One Tyler had written himself. Every act of giving here is an echo of someone who once refused to stay silent. Evelyn looked at the jar. Then she looked at the line behind her. A woman with a stroller. A man with work gloves tucked into his belt. A teenage boy holding a single pack of ramen. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt not just seen, but anchored. She reached into her coat, pulled out a $5 bill, and slipped it into the jar. No one clapped. No one gasped. No one even spoke. But everyone watched. Not with pity. With something closer to reverence. Because that's what legacy is. Not a headline. Not a statue. Just a habit people keep repeating because someone else had the guts to do it first. The story of Register 5 didn't end with Evelyn. It lived on in every jar in every store that decided maybe this was worth copying. It lived on in every cashier who looked someone in the eye and chose empathy over efficiency. It lived on in every customer who whispered, "I've been there too," and reached for their wallet with more heart than hesitation. And it lived on in the quiet knowledge that sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen in the most ordinary places. Like a supermarket aisle, with a broken coin purse, and a woman who refused to disappear. The story of Register 5 reminds us that dignity is not a luxury, it's a need. Behind every quiet struggle is a human being trying to hold their life together, often invisibly. Evelyn's courage to speak, and Tyler's decision to act, however imperfectly, show that compassion isn't about grand gestures. It's about presence, awareness, and the refusal to look away. We're all standing in line somewhere, carrying invisible burdens. Sometimes, all it takes to change a life is $1.88 worth of empathy, and the courage to treat someone not as a problem to fix, but as a person to stand beside. Thank you for spending your time with us. Stories like Evelyn's matter because people like you choose to listen. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about the power of everyday compassion, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing real, meaningful content that shines a light on the quiet heroes among us. And we want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? What stood out? Drop a comment below and let us know. Your voice helps shape the stories we tell next.